There's my water. Yes, last time I ran out of hydration in my mouth. I
Oh
was
no.
I couldn't talk. But yeah, we have an opening question. So it's kind of a silly question. It's nothing too serious. Just get it started. So I'll start off by saying, Pilot Say What?
What?
Exactly. Welcome to another episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. So that's where we're at right now.
Nice.
Today we're sitting with Jake. I'll have you introduce yourself in a moment, but I'm excited to have Jake on here. We did a video with you recently, and I thought that was very informative. People are enjoying that on YouTube right now. And yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself if you don't mind.
So my name is Jake Rose. I'm a flight crew training instructor on the 737 for American Airlines. And I also work here at Thrust as a stage checker, and I help with development of a lot of our policies and procedures, standardization, stuff like that. So
That's really cool. And can you tell me your title one more time? Can you repeat that for at American?
yeah, so I am a flight crew training instructor on the 737 for American, and what that means practically,
Okay,
you know,
yes.
that's what they call it. I'm a ground instructor on the 73, so I
Okay.
teach brand new FOs at American or upgrading captains. It depends. You know, all of the policies, procedures, and basically we get someone. The goal of what we do in our phase of training is we take someone who knows nothing about the 737 at all,
Mm,
or even Americans' policies or procedures sometimes, and we get them to the point that they can get to the jet totally cold and dark, off, nothing,
mm-hmm.
get everything turned on, powered up, ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
and get through a full flight profile all the way gate to gate is what we would say, you know, from like pushing off to then after you land and park it,
Right.
shut it all down. That's our goal of what we do. So we're not lighting engines on fire.
Yeah.
We're not popping motors. We're not doing like the crazy stuff. We're
Mhm.
literally just trying to set that foundation of how does this jet work?
You're
You know,
right.
how do we fly this jet?
Mhm.
How do our policies and procedures apply to how this works? And then once they pass that level, that's
Mhm.
when they go in the sim with the simulator instructors, and that's when they start lighting
Oh.
engines on fire, popping motors, and
Yeah.
rapid decompression and stalls and all the fun maneuvers based stuff.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. I was gonna ask you, how does it cross over with the actual flight training? But you're saying this is like one of the first steps. Is just familiarize yourself with this aircraft, right? More so. Gotcha.
Yeah,
And then how it's related to American.
and it's making sure that they will benefit
Mhm.
from being passed into the full motion sim phase of training. Because
Mm.
think about it, if you don't even know what half of the displays or switches are for,
Mhm.
or what the flows or the policies or the procedures are,
Mhm.
it's going to be way super duper overwhelming getting in the full motion sim, and then things start going wrong when you don't even know what right is yet.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
So we build the normal part to get them comfortable, kind of get their feet under them, and then send them into the sim
Give them
to
a little bit of
have
a
some fun.
foundation. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. How did I mean, did you go straight into this role after getting into your commercial or your CFI? When did you start this in your flight journey?
That's a good question.
Mhm.
I started my flight journey
Mhm.
in 2017.
Mhm.
I started my private pilot at a little school called Jeff Air Pilot Services
Okay.
in Greenwood, Indiana.
Awesome.
We had like 5 airplanes at the time.
Mhm.
So it was an awesome school, small. You know, they were good at what they did. And I got my private there. And then I had the opportunity to start teaching at Ivy Tech Community College
Okay.
there shortly after I got my private. So within 2 weeks of me getting my private, I got my advanced ground instructor certificate
Okay.
and started teaching private pilot course for the community college, which was crazy.
That is pretty cool. Yeah.
I definitely
Did
learned.
that get on your how did that get on your radar? I'm sorry, I didn't want to
Oh no,
interrupt,
you're
but
good. I was managing the partnership between Ivy Tech and Jeff Air Pilot Services while I
okay.
was working there,
Mhm.
and they just asked me if I would teach the private course, and I
Okay.
said I was like, well, I was like, the ink is still wet on my private pilot certificate,
Yeah.
and you want me to teach this to people? And he
Mhm.
was like, you know, the program chair was like, I've seen the work you do for Jeff Air. He's like, if you can get your advanced ground instructor certificate,
Mhm.
then we'll at least try it. And the answer was it couldn't be worse than what we have had recently. So I was like,
Okay.
okay, cool.
I see.
It's a vote of confidence, I guess.
Yeah,
So
that's what it sounds like.
can't
It's
be
like
worse.
we're like, well, we see what you've done, and it's a level up already.
Yeah.
You were gonna say about you've learned so much or
Mhm.
something like that? You got a lot out of that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, teaching the class for the first time at Ivy Tech, standing in front of, and at that point I was 19 or 20,
Mhm.
teaching at the community college with
Wow.
people that were at least half of the class was probably older than I was,
Mhm.
going through this, and I was up there teaching
That's a
the
lot to maneuver.
material, and that was when I really learned and practiced that
Mhm.
like you don't really know something until you can teach it.
Yes.
And through the act of teaching it, it will teach you personally so much more about the topic
Mhm.
than like what you thought you knew about it before you had to like describe it and really like help someone else understand.
Mhm.
It's unreal. It opened my eyes in ways that I mean it was it that opportunity being provided to me is probably the reason why I'm here today.
Yeah, that's amazing that you say that. A lot of our CFIs, well, that's a part of our conversation. Is like once you become a CFI, your eyes open up more than you thought they would.
Mhm.
There's always more to learn or a deeper understanding of what you're teaching,
Mhm.
and so it's cool that you got to experience that at your private
Yeah.
certificate and your private rating, or I guess afterwards. But
Yeah.
that's really awesome to think that that would be your case. Did you ever go into being a CFI?
So money was the biggest
Yeah.
prohibition for me from
Hmm.
getting through all the rest of the certs and ratings
Hmm.
fast.
Hmm.
And I couldn't do, an ATP style program or like thrust offers, any of these larger flight programs that require your full-time commitment and you can't
Hmm.
work through it
Right.
because I had to support myself as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any way. So eventually, I got my private pilot in what 2018,
Hmm.
um and then I got my instrument commercial and CFI all in the summer and fall of 2022
Hmm.
when I started at American Airlines,
Okay. Wow.
and then I could finally afford to pay for it.
And so when you started American Airlines, how did you go about getting your ratings?
I looked around and I was researching for schools.
Hmm.
I looked at some providers out of Arlington,
Hmm.
and then I found Thrust pretty quickly, and I
Hmm.
narrowed it down to two,
Hmm.
one out of Arlington or Thrust. And
Hmm.
then after doing like a discovery flight with both, I just liked Thrust product
Yeah.
better, and I thought it would suit me better.
Yeah.
So then I literally was just working full time Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week or more sometimes.
Hmm.
And in the time I wasn't working, I would just come here and fly.
That makes sense. And was so you started working with us around that time? Is that how that happened, or I'm
Yeah,
because
I started in August of 2022, shortly after I got my CFI. So I got my CFI. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I started in September of 22 because I got my CFI August 22nd of
okay.
2022.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really good.
Mhm.
I guess the reason I asked that is because normally, right, it's a full time student situation where it's you're not really able to work outside of the school. Where you, but you were able to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a lot,
Mm-hmm.
especially during the time building for commercial, because
Mm-hmm.
between the time when I got my private to when I picked back up on training again,
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten a lot of hours because I'd flown over
Mm.
that time,
Yeah.
either personally or with friends. So I had acquired a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started my commercial, it just made more sense to do it part 61 than to
Mm-hmm.
do it part 141 because it would have been less hours for me to hit 250 than
Right.
to do the full total hours of the 141 program.
Yeah.
So I had to time build to get there, and I time built almost like 55 hours in the month of July while I was working full time, flying nights and weekends
Yeah.
with other people, and it was definitely a lot,
Yeah.
but it was so much fun. It
Yeah.
was so much fun, and it was an amazing opportunity to be able to do that, and I'm glad I did the route that I did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
That's really it's a much more it's a very different route than I get to hear people talk about. So that's really interesting to hear the different options that
Hmm.
people may have. Not that everyone would do it exactly that way, but there's more than one way to get your certificates.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I want to go back to so you're working at American Airlines when you have your private rating and you start working at the community college at Ivy Tech, right? Or I missed not
Oh,
Ivy
so
Tech, my bad.
I was at Jeff Air
Oh
in
yes,
Greenwood,
that's what
Indiana,
it
and
was.
Ivy Tech for a while.
Jeff Aaron.
And then eventually, Lift Academy had started up in Indianapolis, and one of my previous instructors
Uh-huh.
had gone there and started working.
Hmm.
And through process of, hey, we're looking for this. Do you know this? He asked me, he was like, hey, would you want to come work here? They're
Yeah.
interested in sort of your type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, cool. So then when Lift Academy was like 18 months old, they had probably like 15 or 20 airplanes and maybe 70 students, and
Yeah.
a handful of instructors. They've got 3 different locations now across the country. And like by the time I left, they had 50 airplanes, like 75 instructors and over 300 students. And it was like an outstanding experience to be able to participate in like the rapid growth of a flight school like that. And I think that's probably partly why I was attracted to Thrust when I was looking for schools, because I had come from a more corporate, I guess, well put together, like
structured,
organized approach to the flight training, and I felt like Thrust had more of that going on for it than any of the other schools I saw in the area, which was like, okay, yeah, they got their stuff together. I feel good about the investment of putting my dollars here.
right?
And that's not just a shameless pitch because I work for Thrust now.
Yeah.
I passed my instrument, I passed my commercial, I passed my CFI, and I passed my CFII all first attempt from the training I got at Thrust. So it was definitely worth it.
That's amazing. Is that when you came to Texas? Okay, gotcha. And is that why you came to Texas?
I moved to Texas in February of 2022 because I went from Lyft to then got hired at American. So my first job at American was I was the senior curriculum designer on the Airbus and the 737 for their advanced qualification program.
Okay.
And essentially for big airlines that are operating Part 121, you've got, just like us, Part 61 or Part 141, you've got specific parts of those regulations that say what you have to do to train pilots to be able to meet the requirements. Part 121 is unique because it's like, the difference between Part 61 and 141 is like 61 is just a list of what you have to have. Minimums are minimums. Hit it. If you don't hit it, you can't go.
Right.
Part 141 lets you kind of customize that a little bit, bring the hours down a little bit, customize your footprint, but it's still pretty straightforward of you got to have this. The AQP, Advanced Qualification Program, in Part 121 world is really unique because it basically gives the airline the control of what they train, when they train it, right? How they train it, how they evaluate it. And it's all a data-driven approach at pilot training because the FAA recognizes that at the 121 level, they're going to be doing a super high volume of training all the time. Every operation is going to be different based on their theater they're operating, what type of equipment they're flying, what type of experience they're getting of the pilots that they come in, right?
Yeah.
Entry-level skills and abilities at Envoy, not the same as entry-level skills and abilities at American.
Right.
So they have different programs. And the AQP lets that airline really, really, really intricately customize the training that they provide to the pilots based on the data they receive from their training. So it's a big loop, right? They design the training, they implement it, they collect the data on it, they analyze it, decide what changes they need to do, then they design new training, implement it, and it just follows a circle all the time to try to continuously improve and provide like the best, most specific training that you could possibly give. And the FAA reasonably recognized that like we can't regulate to every single airline in the United States and give that level of care and attention,
specialized training.
So they delegate it to the airlines.
That's what I was wondering. And the airlines, of course, they want to do that kind of thing, and it allows them to train people specifically for what they need them to do, right? Just to make sure I get some of these down. AQP, can you explain what AQP stands for?
So AQP is the Advanced Qualification Program.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Which is essentially like either you do your training from regular old 121, the subparts within there, kind of the way that you would think of in general aviation doing Part 61 training, versus the AQP is sort of like the airline 141 version of the training where you get to customize it.
And that's where the 121 comes in because it's airline and it's approved through the FAA for the airlines to be able to have an AQP in the first place. Okay, that's really cool. What qualifies someone to be a part of that program? How does that work?
This is where it gets into my trajectory getting in aviation and sort of being an instructor now is like I've had a long road to get here.
Yeah.
And I will say that like I've had a lot of pressure from people saying like you need to do everything you can to get in the flight deck of a jet tomorrow. Like don't go on the vacations, don't have the friends, don't have the relationship, max out the credit cards, like just get the flight hours and get in the jet.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that I would push back against that with is like,
Mm.
our entire career is dependent on our medical being good
Yeah.
all the way until you're 65.
Yeah.
And like, as much as you want to try to control that and exercise and eat well, it's also kind of out of your control,
Mm-hmm.
right? So being able to have other experience in life
Mm-hmm.
to lean back on and have like a solid plan of like, okay, this is my career, this is what I want to do, but like, what's going to happen if I can't fly anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that people need to have an answer for, that I have tried really hard to make sure that I have an answer and a plan for.
Mm-hmm.
Because you never know,
Yeah.
and a part of my delay in training was also hugely cost, because
Yeah.
I just couldn't afford to do it until I got hired at American.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious because I ended up working at a major before most of my friends
Right.
that were pilots coming up through the regionals. I just wasn't there as a pilot.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was there managing the training department, which is hilarious because that's how we started out in the beginning.
Exactly.
I was managing the training at the flight school where they learned to fly, and now I'm managing at the training at the airline where they want to retire from.
Exactly.
Hopefully I can get in a jet soon, man. I'm
Yeah,
trying, I'm hoping I can get in a jet at some point.
It seems like you're working towards it. It seems like
I
you're doing
am.
the right thing.
Yeah.
You're still flying, right?
Yes.
Great. And is that something that is that like what the next step is for you to be able to try to get to flying in a jet?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, to that sort of single-minded pursuit of
Yeah.
like the seniority number, there's a quote that sticks out in my mind from an author. His name's Robert Pierzig. He's amazing. Wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. If you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. It's good.
That's wild.
But the
Okay.
quote says, "To live life in pursuit of a single goal is shallow. It's the sides of the mountain that sustain life, after all."
That's
Right?
good. Yeah.
And
Okay.
what I see happen a lot through, I've been working and training for like 7, 8 years now.
Mhm.
So I've seen a lot of student pilots become, professional instructors, go on to the airline. And one of the things that I just don't want to happen for me and would caution other people against
Mhm.
is like, you still got to take care of yourself,
Mhm.
and you still have to have time to like enjoy life in the
Mhm.
process of getting to the airline.
Mhm.
Because what I've seen happen too many times is people do live with like single-minded pursuit for like a
Right.
year and a half, 2 years, and they just burn all the way out. They just burn totally out to the point where they like hate aviation
Mhm.
because it's just drained them to their core,
Mhm.
when it's something that like was so exciting and energizing. Like, why did you get into it in the first place?
Right.
Because it's cool and it's fun and you love it, and it's
Yeah.
like you get to say I'm a pilot. But then some people, by the time they finally get that airline job, they just hate it.
Yeah.
And then they spend the rest of the time in that career feeling like, oh my God, I got to go fly again. It's like, I don't want to do that. I want to walk into that airplane and feel like I get to fly today. How
So,
cool is that?
what do you say to someone who is is doing it aggressively, or I'm sorry, approaching their training aggressively and wanting to get to the airlines? Let's say they like to kind of hustle and bustle to get where they want to go. Like maybe even students here. How do they manage that here while still being a full-time student?
I would say that, just speaking from personal experience, I
Mhm.
haven't worked anything less than 2 jobs for probably almost, since 2017 now, probably.
Yeah.
So like, I'm also very like bad about letting myself get to the point of burnout.
Mhm.
And I think it's natural for very motivated people to do that,
Right.
because you're so goal oriented and you're so focused on succeeding and achieving what you set out to do,
Mhm.
that sometimes it's really easy to just kind of not care for yourself.
Mhm.
And then you find yourself in a place where like you don't have energy, you can't like seem to catch up on rest. Maybe you're either losing weight or gaining weight, whichever way, whatever.
Mhm.
um I would say the best advice I can give is you just have to remember, like, take care of yourself like you would take care of someone else.
Mhm.
Like, if there's someone else in your care that you had to look out for, if one of your friends, you were giving them advice on how to like balance their life, like,
Mhm.
do that for yourself.
Right.
Don't take your own advice.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to just blowtorch the candle at both ends,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then be left with nothing, and
Yeah.
be like, "Whoa, how did I get to be here? That was fast."
Yeah.
It's like, well,
Absolutely.
yeah, when you're running it.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line, because you also don't want to be lazy about the approach.
Yeah.
The only way to be successful in this career that I've found is like, you have to eat, sleep, and breathe aviation.
Hmm.
Like it has to be your everything.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a little balance there as well
Hmm.
on the personal side,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah,
So
you still have to, like you said, just care for yourself. At the end of the day, you don't want to be going into flying a plane with on zero sleep. You
no,
know,
right,
that's like that
exactly.
doesn't sound like a good
Not
idea.
safe for you
Yeah,
or anybody
and
else.
that's why there's regulations and things like that that are in place to help with those sorts of things. I've come to understand. I don't really know what those are, but I know that even at our school, you can only fly up to how many hours a day? Like 8 hours a day, I think a CFI can do.
Yep.
So that's good because I can imagine with, like you said, the I don't want to say pressure, with the common ambition being to fly as much as possible. We're like, oh, let's watch out on that. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that there are things in place to help out with that.
Yeah.
Because I'm a go getter too. I mean, I've worked at 2 jobs most of my life and
Hmm.
things like that. So I would be that kind of person to be like, I want to fly all day.
Yeah. And it's,
So,
I think as an instructor in thinking more to the instructor audience that may or may not be listening is
mhm.
like when you become an instructor, it's easy in the beginning to be like, "Oh my God, finally, I'm getting paid
Yep.
to fly.
Uh huh.
I'm getting way more hours every day than I ever have before as a student.
Hmm.
It's sometimes less stressful. So then you just want to do it like you want to max out 8 hours every day. And then you realize that like to be an effective instructor, like you have to give a lot of yourself to your student during every
Right.
single one of those flights.
Hmm.
And if you're flying, you got 4 2-hour blocks,
Hmm.
that's not going to turn out to 8 hours on the Hobbs.
Hmm.
If it's 8 hours of reserved time.
Hmm.
Um, but you come to realize really quickly that like you can't be an effective instructor if you don't have enough of you left to give. That comes in sleep, that comes in like balancing,
Like
like we were
food.
talking about life,
Hmm.
food,
Yeah.
eating is huge.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking too. Is like a lot of what you're saying is I think in my past I've always wanted to like, oh, I think I need to pull back on certain things, but really I just need to prepare.
Hmm.
Maybe look at it like preparation. Maybe I should make some food, right? Or maybe I should be aware of how much I need to sleep and make time for that. Make time to hang out with my girlfriend. You know what I mean? And then when I go into work, I'm gonna feel a lot better.
Hmm.
Or even if I'm working a lot, I come to realize that what you do outside of work does affect what you do in work.
Hugely,
Yeah, and it's
hugely.
like a preparation thing. I used to think it was more of like a moderate thing, a moderation, but for me, it's like preparation.
Yeah,
I
it's a
look
good
at
way
it
to
that
look
way.
at it.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
how I started looking at it. I get your journey a little bit. We went through how you got started and how you got into training, and then you've been working it a little bit less conventionally to get different kinds of experience, and now you're gaining some hours. What I'm wondering is, before all of that, where did your interest in aviation come from?
I just I just thought airplanes were so cool.
Yeah,
I was the type of person that would watch like how it's made in Modern Marvels on
I watched those
TV.
things, yeah, on the History Channel.
So anybody who knows me that's seeing this is gonna be like, yeah, that checks.
Yeah,
But airplanes just fascinated me because it's like what?
yeah,
It's like this multi-ton machine
yeah,
just like dancing through the sky,
yeah.
gracefully just hanging out, and getting from point A to point B, it's like you're relying on like a million things to go correct all the time
Mhm,
mechanically, and it
mhm.
does consistently, which is insane.
Yeah,
It's insanely impressive.
it is.
So from the time I was a kid, I was just always sort of like fascinated by airplanes generally.
Mhm.
And then my parents bought me a discovery flight for my 16th birthday.
Oh, wow.
And I did a discovery flight, and it was like, what?
Yeah.
And then I didn't think of it as a career initially going into college, and
Mhm.
then I actually dropped out. I went to college for 2 years, and I was like, no, nope,
Yeah,
hate that.
yeah.
Left, and then that's what propelled me to like,
Mhm.
oh well, I should be doing something. I don't want to
Right.
do nothing. So I picked up the flight training again, and here we are.
Well, then if you so your first experience in, like, I guess taking aviation a little more serious, was that at, Ivy Tech?
It would have been it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think
Because I'm wondering when did you say, "I want to actually try to make this a career?"
I would say when I started working at Jeff Air
Okay.
prior to Ivy Tech,
Mhm.
and while I was getting my private, like right towards the time when I was almost done with my private pilot, I'll never forget.
Mhm.
I had a mock oral evaluation.
Mhm.
And for anybody that's ever had me for ground, is gonna laugh at this
Yeah.
because I bombed my first mock oral
Mhm.
for the private pilot, like bombed it. And it's hilarious because, at Thrust, I'm known as sort of like the ground guru, but it's because I've been teaching the ground material since 2018.
Yeah.
I have thousands of hours of ground instruction. I started at the same place as any of these other instructors have. I'm the exact same.
Yeah.
Like, I just have more experience.
Yeah.
That's literally all it is. I've found better ways to teach things. That's my
Mhm.
favorite thing to give other instructors is like, try approaching it this way.
Yeah.
But going through, I lost where I was
No,
going.
you're good. You're good. We were saying when you started to take it a serious, like when you really want to approach it as a career.
When I
At the end of your
when I failed that mock oral with the instructor, his name was Andy, and he flies at American Airlines now. Ironically enough, he's an American, and I failed, and he had all the answers. I mean, he just had all the answers.
Yeah.
Everything I was missing, dude didn't have to look at a book, didn't look at his phone, didn't Google, nothing, just boom, boom. And I was like, by the time we were done, I was like, how do you like remember all this? And he told me that someone told him while he was going through his training when he had a similar moment was like, if you want to be successful in this, you have to eat, sleep, and breathe aviation. And you have to make it the priority because there is so much to manage that like if you don't dedicate yourself to it wholly, you won't be able to do it.
Right.
And I was like, wow, okay. And I really took that to heart. And then within the next couple of months, I had the opportunity to start teaching at Ivy Tech. And that really like required me to up my level of like preparation and knowledge because, you know, I think back to a quote from a teacher I had in high school. It's like, show up with something smart to say.
Yeah.
At minimum, just show up with something smart to say, you know, come prepared, have something to offer. In the teaching the private pilot class, I prepped a lot, but where I think I learned the most was from the questions the students would ask me because it forced me to think about, I would explain it in a way that made sense to me.
Right.
But it didn't make sense to them.
And you find out the problem areas.
Yeah.
And then you have to identify and solve.
Through their process of questioning, it forced me to describe what I was talking about in sometimes 3 and 4 different ways, in ways that I never would have thought about unless I was forced to like really make sure somebody got it.
Yeah.
And that's why I would say like I am effective as an instructor and a ground instructor now, just because I've had enough of those opportunities over time that I've had that so much that I just remember what sticks with people the most,
Absolutely.
you know, over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. It's cool to hear that you're starting your career, like I said, in a different place. Now that you're doing all these different things, most people I'm talking to, they're going to be a student, they're going to become a CFI, and then they may explore the idea of like 135 or something like that, and then they're going to look for going towards the airlines. Maybe some people though want to be as trained as possible at being a pilot. And there's some different, like for example, earlier you talked about your advanced ground instructor certificate. There's so many other certificates that may fall on the like right on the outside of that path that people may be interested in. Is there anything that you would maybe like to highlight would be interesting to some students that are like curious about other options?
Student advice: when you take your instrument written, take the CFII written, and take the IGI written. Do them all because they're all identical, and that question bank is like, personally and from most others, it's like the most painful to study and get down because of all the figures and just the way it's written is difficult. Yeah. You know, instrument flying is one thing, but the written for instrument is a totally another thing. It's a whole different animal. So I would recommend just, you know, you're going to have to get the CFII eventually anyway. So after you take the instrument, do that because it's the same bank. And then if you want to have another 3 letters on your certificate or on your resume, do the IGI. To get any of those instructor certificates for the ground and be able to use them, you got to pass the fundamentals of instruction or FOI as well, right? So there's the BGI, the basic ground instructor, the AGI, the advanced ground instructor, and the IGI, the instrument ground instructor. So BGI means you can teach private and sport. AGI means you can teach commercial private sport and like multi, but there's no required ground for multi, but there are multi questions within that bank. And then instrument just means now you can also do instrument and all those things. I don't see any benefit in getting the BGI at all. Yeah. Just get the AGI. Yeah. Because then you can do all the things, right?
So it's not a prerequisite, right?
Nope. Okay. I would say skip the BGI. It's a waste of $175 unless you specifically just want to only teach private.
Mm-hmm.
then it's less questions in the bank. So then maybe it makes sense.
Yeah.
But for most applications I've heard, just skip that, go to the AGI.
Right.
And then the IGI, again, it's just, if you get the AGI and the IGI, you got
Mm-hmm.
6 extra letters on your resume.
Right.
Looks good. And then for those candidates that want to do the instructor path,
Mm-hmm.
there's also a little feather in the cap you can get called the gold seal.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you sign 10 applicants off and you have at least an 80% first time pass rate, so 8 out of 10 of your first sign offs all pass on the first attempt, or 80%, it can be more than 10.
Mm-hmm.
You could have 20 when you submit, as long as your pass rate's above 80%.
Right.
And you have one of those ground instructor certificates.
Yeah.
You can get your gold seal.
Okay.
So it's just a little golden circle.
Is that what it is?
It literally goes on your
you're like
certificate.
that good of a. Okay, that's pretty cool.
It
goes on the certificate.
More than an 80% pass rate, and you have a ground instructor certificate. Congratulations! And
That's awesome.
it's a little tiny yellow circle that goes on your. It's not even gold colored. It's like straight up yellow.
Yeah,
but it's your gold seal. Dang it!
But it's like a golden star almost.
Yeah, exactly. It's like your good noodle star.
Yeah, exactly. That's
as
awesome.
An instructor.
Well then, so let's say someone's maybe interested in not becoming a CFI and maybe finding another way to work in the airlines before they become a pilot for a jet or something like that. Now, are you familiar with any other roles that are similar, that have a similar level of entry like yours? If that makes sense.
So with the airline, something like American, you can kind of divide it into if we look at flight operations specifically, right? That has everything to do with getting the airplane from point A to point B, from pilots, from flight attendants, from ground service personnel to safety monitoring for all those groups, all the dispatchers, right? Flight encompasses a huge portion of an airline. And there's opportunities in all of them. I think one of the coolest things to do that maybe a later in life or retirement gig for me is the safety part of it. Fascinating. I mean, absolutely fascinating, right? American Airlines, we've got, FOQA, the Flight Operations Quality Assurance. That's essentially the airplanes at an airline are constantly recording like all of the parameters of everything all the time, airspeed, altitude,
right,
bank, pitch, everything, right? G loading, right? Where are you physically, your location, all of the things, your configuration, like what flaps are you at? What's your engines at? Everything. And that FOQA, that Flight Operations Quality Assurance, basically is monitoring that data stream they get from all the airplanes for anything that's like outside of what the parameters should be. So that's one small aspect. Then there's like the ASAP. So FOQA is like the airplane telling on itself. Then there's the ASAP side of the house, which is the Aviation Safety Action Program. And that's where the pilots tell on ourselves.
Yeah.
Where you maybe did something wrong. Honest mistake, forgot, maybe, I don't know, had a heading wrong for a period of time. And they're like, oh my gosh, nope, that was incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, ATC didn't say anything, but that was wrong.
Yeah.
Fill out an ASAP, right?
Yeah.
And it's a way to kind of Scout's honor, like, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I didn't get called out on it, but I'm telling you about it because I want us to be better.
Document it kind of thing. Yeah.
And Thrust kind of has a similar safety reporting culture as that with our safety submission stuff, where the same attitude at the airline is the same attitude here, is like, it's going to be so much better for everyone involved, top to bottom, if you just come and say like, oh my gosh, hey, yeah, this happened, regardless of what it is. Just tell us, hey, here's exactly what happened. Then we can figure out like, why did it happen? What were the contributing factors? How can we help make it not happen in the future?
Right.
Versus if we find out, weeks or significant periods of time later, oh, by the way, this happened. What? Have we heard from them at all? No. What?
Because the likelihood is that it's not like, there's probably more people doing the same thing. Let's highlight it now. Let's address it now, kind of thing. That's pretty cool. And so, but those are ways that people can participate in the airlines already.
Data analysts, like dispatchers, you have to get additional certificate for. But I mean, there's so much, especially in an organization as big as American or Delta or United, they're huge. So the opportunity there, if it's not a pilot specific job, there's so much. I mean, there's so much.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I just like to highlight that. There's different career paths. So, we've covered a lot of things already.
Yeah.
I don't think there's probably so much to talk about still with you, I feel like, but I think I want to kind of end on a note of asking you, for any maybe tips or advice for current students at in any part of their journey, whether it be at Thrust or not. Maybe an accelerated program
Mhm.
somewhere. But would you have any, I guess, general tips on how to maneuver and prepare to be the best pilot they can be?
I think the I think the biggest thing that separates like a good student from a great student is the ability to like balance your life
Mm-hmm.
and prioritize,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you can study effectively and make sure you actually dedicate yourself the time to make the progress you need to make
Mm-hmm.
while also still giving yourself the room to be a person,
Mm-hmm.
it makes you a lot more pleasant to be around.
Yeah.
You're easier to instruct because you're not, kind of like locked in, fatigued, super exhausted, tired, and just kind of like grumpy, I guess,
Yeah.
And when we're more rested and we're happy, our brains are more receptive to
Right.
learning new things and it
Mm.
sticks better. And that's legitimate. We could go on a long conversation about that, but that's
Yeah.
true,
It's true. Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things to being successful as a student in aviation is really just remembering why did you get into it and
Mm-hmm.
staying committed to that vision of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
respecting and loving yourself enough to care for yourself along that journey
Mm-hmm.
and not living life, shallow-minded pursuit of a single goal only,
Yeah.
because that it'll burn you out so fast. And
Yeah.
and it's not fun to be in a perpetual state of burnout. It takes a long time to get to the airlines.
Yeah.
You got to go through your private instrument, commercial, multi, CFI, CFII,
Mm-hmm.
maybe MEI if you feel like it.
Yeah.
Then you probably have, 300 or so hours. So you got 1,200 more hours to go before you
Right.
can even apply to the airline.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long, like, it is a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and keeping a focus on like just trying to enjoy it as you
Yeah.
go through,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Yeah.
Like just over 100 years ago, we weren't flying at all.
Yeah. Exactly.
Airplanes didn't exist.
Yeah.
And we get to be alive in a point in time right now where we get to fly like mechanical contraptions
Yeah.
through the sky, sometimes faster than the speed of sound or very close to it,
Mm-hmm.
and get paid really good money to do it.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Exactly.
Like this is
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, I think that goes with that. I think sometimes we take these things for granted.
Yeah.
And it's like we get to fly a couple 100,000-pound pieces of machinery
Yeah.
across the ocean
Yeah.
with hundreds of people in the back and get paid like super sick
Yeah.
to be able to do that when
Yeah.
like this career field, like
Didn't
a
even
century ago, it didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Wild. It's
Yeah. It's
wild.
awesome.
I mean,
It's
it
a cool
just,
place.
I
It's
get
a cool
excited.
time. Yeah.
Makes
It's
me
a,
smile.
yeah. That's awesome. It's a cool place and time. That's a good
Yeah.
way to highlight it. I actually, for the record, think I've always looked at the planes when I walk by them. I'm like, I can't believe that thing goes into the air.
Yeah. Right?
So that's always been very interesting to me as well. So I share that sentiment with you.
Money and magic, they
Yep.
make them fly.
Money
Those
and
two
magic.
things.
There you go. And a little bit of genius. Okay. Well, I appreciate you, Jake, for coming on. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on anywhere in that conversation. But I think we're getting to the end of it all here. So, okay. Well, I do appreciate you coming through.
Thank you.
This was a great episode of Pilot Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. And I'm looking forward to talk to you some more and seeing how your whole journey goes. And thank you for
Sweet.
participating in our program here
Of course.
at Thrust. And I guess if anyone has any questions for Jake, I'm sure he'll see it in the comments maybe.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Exactly. And if you do have those questions, the comments are where we want them to be. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week on the next episode.